Mission and margin is the business of healthcare.
And that's created about a $500 million plus headwind of reimbursement into the lab market starting this year. And it will continue and it will accelerate as we move on. So certainly a reimbursement headwind that the lab is facing. And so what's been very interesting to see is that a lot of progressive labs are looking at ways to change the value proposition. If we continue to be a fee-for-service provider and that fee is going down, how do we transition to creating a value proposition or fee for value statement that says maybe the lab can do more than just process and give back great test results? My experience, and especially in healthcare, and my personality as well, my management style, all anchor on connection, communication, and cooperation, the antithesis of chaos, conflict, and discontent. It's the other side, because in that what I've seen is the durability of what you create, the longevity, the profitability, the satisfaction that's created actually is so much greater in value than trying to get that short-term win through using some of those other measures. So it was important for me to maybe in an era where the pendulum is over on one side a little bit, say, think about this, and because this one works too, and oh, by the way, it might be the better long-term approach as well.
That was Andy Olen, author of Trilogy of Yes, and Senior Vice President of North America Laboratory Diagnostics at Siemens Healthineers. His Business of Healthcare interview explores workforce and reimbursement changes in the diagnostic laboratory business and resulting innovation to deliver better quality preventative care. The lab business is experiencing financial pressure from the $500 million Medicare revenue cuts due to the 2014 Protecting Access to Medicare Act, also called PAMA, and broader fee-for-value reimbursement trends. Labs and their suppliers are also facing major change as an emerging workforce with different expectations replaces retiring baby boomers. Lab businesses are responding by adding value to the diagnostic data they generate. Laboratories aim to harness algorithms, longitudinal patient data, and automation to address these evolving workforce and reimbursement trends. BOH host Matthew Hanis began this interview by asking Olen about the financial pressures faced by labs.
Andy Olen, thank you so much for joining the Business of Healthcare today.
It's great, Matt, to be here with you. Business and healthcare, two of my favorite topics.
So there's a pressure point that's coming in the lab industry.
Right.
What is that pressure point?
Well, the pressure point is that as we've evolved and we continue to evolve from a fee-for-service delivery, and if you think of the lab, it's test request comes in, sample comes in, and the more that the lab does, the more they've been reimbursed for that. That is a fee-for-service paradigm. However, we're living in a fee-for-value paradigm now with all the transformation in healthcare that's happened. So the lab is moving through that fee-for-service to fee-for-value transformation. And the implications of that, from reimbursement to clinical delivery to consolidation of buying groups, all of that has an implication together. So lab leaders are juggling a lot of different aspects of their business now and trying to not only have it address today's needs, but for the needs for the next 10 years.
And one of the big transitions that's going on is the Protecting Access to Medicare Act.
Right.
Tell me about how the PAMA Act specifically impacts the lab industry.
So what PAMA looked at, what the federal government took a look at and recently issued a new rule, a new guidance that resulted in some lower reimbursement for laboratories. What they saw was they saw a delta. They saw that laboratories for their outreach business, or the business that they were, the tests that they were performing for clinicians and healthcare providers outside of their hospital system, the stuff that came into them, that the federal government was paying a little bit more than the private payers were. And so what the PAMA Act says is we're going to harmonize over the next couple of years that payment level. And that's created about a $500 million plus headwind of reimbursement into the lab market starting this year. And it will continue and it will accelerate as we move on. So certainly a reimbursement headwind that the lab is facing.
And does that affect health systems more or less than the independent lab businesses like Quest or LabCorp?
Well, it's certainly a topic that is front and center for all laboratories. The pool of reimbursement, private and also from the government, is something that's closely watched by all labs and also by industry. So it's something that everyone has a perspective on. How different players react now with this new reimbursement rule is going to be really the telling and interesting part. And so what's been very interesting to see is that a lot of progressive labs are looking at ways to change the value proposition. If we continue to be a fee-for-service provider and that fee is going down, how do we transition to creating a value proposition or fee-for-value statement that says maybe the lab can do more than just process and give back great test results, consistent and predictable results. Maybe we can do something more with the data that we're capturing and change the conversation where we become a profit center to the hospital or institution versus a cost center.
So what does that look like? How does a lab introduce a new value proposition like that?
Well, it's not easy because it's transformational. If you think the genesis of the lab, it's always been about sample in, running great results, dependable results, giving that insight back, 70% of healthcare decisions then being made off it. So, and the enemy to laboratories in general at a very high level is variability, right? We need to have a consistent, predictable foundation to run consistent and predictable tests. So as you go through a transformation like that, it's some new muscle building for lab leaders. And one of the great examples is the Lab 2.0 Consortium, where they are bringing progressive lab leaders and not only institutions, but also IDNs and GPO leaders together and saying, how do we do it differently? And what's most interesting is they say the gold mine that the laboratory has is the longitudinal data that we capture on all the patients we serve by running tests on them. So if you think about me, if you take a cholesterol test for me and you take some tests over a couple years in time, maybe over time, there's a signal that says Andy's pre-diabetic. And wouldn't it be better to the health system in terms of caring for me and delivering health care for me, and in terms of the economic benefit of the health system to treat me in a pre-diabetic state versus somehow allowing me to get to a diabetic state, which would be much more expensive. If the lab can pick up through algorithms, through the data that they have at their fingertips, and it's not easy to do, if the lab can do that and start to reshape healthcare delivery towards a preventative model, I believe the transformation of the lab in a value environment will be pretty significant, and the impact will move from being a cost center to a profit center.
Andy, tell me a little bit about the work you do at Siemens Healthineers.
I'm the Senior Vice President for North American Diagnostics at Siemens Healthineers, and so I manage sales, marketing, and applications teams serving thousands of labs across the United States.
And in your career, your entry into the diagnostic laboratory space is actually fairly recent. Tell me a little bit about your work prior to that.
Yeah, so about a year now in lab diagnostics, and it's been fantastic. Prior to that, I was working in interventional cardiology, doing stents and balloons and angioplasty systems, also in capital equipment as well. So a lot of opportunities to work with teams all around the globe, sales, marketing, general management across multiple industries within healthcare.
And you happen to walk into the lab industry where there's a little bit of change going
Just a little
on.
bit,
Talk
yes.
about that. What is the trend in lab?
Well, first of all, it's an exciting time in lab. Siemens Healthineers does 12 billion tests a year around the globe. So there is a lot going on in the lab. The lab is part of 70% of all healthcare decisions and influences 70% of all healthcare decisions that are made. So it is a big foundational element of healthcare delivery globally. So the scale is there. The informatics piece is fascinating. The fluidics piece are the reagents, and then the big hardware piece too, and all of the automation and all of the focus on improving turnaround times and having that consistent and predictable test result that a pathologist, a lab director can depend on.
In many ways, the lab is a very industrial manufacturing process almost in healthcare, not to suggest that in a negative way, but it's very akin to perfecting the manufacturing process of other chemical processes. Is that a fair description?
There's a hardware component, there's an automation component that is big hardware, and then there's also the pharmaceutical component, which is the fluidics. And then you have to put the chemistry together with the hardware, and what a lab leader is going to look for is consistency and predictability in the results that they're giving to the healthcare provider. And that predictability, that consistency, and that dependability that those lab leaders have for industry is a crucial part of this mix. So it's all those things coming together, and informatics to tie all the data together that makes it a really spectacular and dynamic place to work and be a part of.
So to the degree that labs seek to create gold value
Yeah.
Now, let me say this differently. So to the degree that labs seek to create value proposition over the longitudinal lab data,
Right.
is it possible that electronic health record providers and analytic providers might actually be competitors to that?
It's possible. I think likely partners. We are on really sort of the tip of the spear, if you will, or a new horizon of looking at informatics and healthcare in a very evolved way. Artificial intelligence is just starting to come online. At Siemens Healthineers, we have very robust efforts towards software development for the laboratory. So I definitely think that if it's a lab information system play, if it's a vendor-driven software solution, I think there are going to be a lot of efforts across the industry that are going to be ultimately successful in helping labs pull that data out. What the laboratory leaders are doing now is actually doing some basic skill building with lab leaders and actually teaching them how to run a better business, a different business. So they're doing things like SWOT analysis. They're doing things like positioning. Some traditional marketing elements are now being taught to lab leaders, because at the end of the day, if they can find a way to harness the power of the data, they still then have to go back to the hospital institutions and say, hey, we got something of value that I think you should use. Listen to us. And that's going to be a really fun journey.
So as labs try to create this new value proposition, what's another example of something that a lab is uniquely able to do?
Well, I know in the southwestern part of the United States, a very progressive lab is actually looking at how to prevent early term delivery. And what they've done is they found some markers within the longitudinal data that may signal a woman is at risk for an early term delivery. And you can appreciate, Matt, that keeping woman and child out of the emergency department, out of an early term situation, is obviously better for the mom, better for the child, and also better for the economics of the health system. So what are the preventative measures that should be taken? How can general practitioners or the OB doctors help prevent that potentially serious issue? Moreover, they are able to use population health management software tools to find the patients and then either through text or telephone call be very proactive in shaping a preventative regimen or prescription in order to avoid the more dramatic intervention or emergency that could come later.
Wow, so I've actually done, as you know, quite a bit of work in OB, and appreciate the early term labor. I think it's somewhere around 7% of all deliveries have early term labor. So this progress is representative of being able to look at lab data longitudinally during the pregnancy to pick up a trend. Is that sort of the trigger point?
That's the trigger point. And it could also be done if there are markers or characteristics that pop up in the laboratory results even before that woman is pregnant.
Wow.
And it's about the algorithms, and it's about mining the data, and it's really turning, the great work of the lab is producing that result that then is interpreted by the healthcare provider to make a diagnosis. Now, can the laboratory, here's the probing question, and what so many folks are working on is, can the laboratory actually help provide the insight up front? So here's the data back. And oh, by the way, let me tell you what we're seeing here. And that precision medicine type approach, that concierge service that the lab can or could produce and is working on that, will evolve that value proposition from fee for service to fee for value via insights.
You're in an industry undergoing great change.
Yes.
Lab industry, healthcare industry.
Yes.
This change, what's it doing to the sales and service function within your organization?
Well, it's a super important piece of our go-to-market and the care of our instrumentation. I can say this for all vendors in this space. This is right there. Look, the premium is first on creating a great system. At Siemens Healthineers, we really are focused on creating incredibly reliable instruments where ideally that service person doesn't need to show up after it's installed, right? Because if they're called, there may be something that's not working quite right. And when called, they have to execute real well and get these things up and running. So I would say the marketplace in general is very attuned to this. One of the challenges, though, across the industry, and there are many papers written on this, and there's also an impact to the laboratory, is that there are changes in generations in the profile of the generations who are in the lab business, who are in the service business, who are in the sales and marketing lab business. And as boomers move a little bit closer to retirement and all the wealth and the value of their experience transitions into a different phase of life, that information and that knowledge transfer has to move with the folks that are coming in. And for labs specifically, one of the biggest issues and topics they have is it's challenging to find really talented and accredited people to run labs. And so the people issue, behind the great work of the analyzers and the instruments and the chemistry, the people could be some headwinds that we're going to face here over the next few years.
And I feel like there's probably two aspects to that. One is the differences in the generations, the cultural differences, the style of work, the tendency to be more digital in a younger generation, perhaps the tendency to also expect perhaps a more balanced life. That's sort of one part. Talk a little bit about that. What implications you see there of the generational differences?
Yeah, well, think about the laboratory. It runs 24 hours, 7 days a week. It runs weekends, and there's a change as you move into millennials that we're seeing, that the work ethic is phenomenal, the energy is phenomenal, but maybe the desire to work weekends and nights isn't as strong of a pull as it was for someone in my generation. And so the labs are feeling this situation, they're seeing this situation, and the recruitment then becomes more difficult. In parallel, we have service people, both hardware and fluidics and also informatics, where our customers are going to say, hey, look, we're doing a big LIS conversion. We're not doing it during prime time on a Monday morning. We're going to do it on the weekend at night. Siemens Healthineers, we need your team there with us. So we're looking for people that are first committed to their customer, committed to doing great work. And however, I will say, as the lab work continues to go 24/7, some of the social and occupational demographics of the generations are changing, and we have to address that as a community.
And then you have the additional issue of the demographic bubble moving through, where you have the boomers who have a rich set of experience, probably very, very important, intimate customer relationships, and then a younger generation coming in and the need to transfer that knowledge, transfer that relationship.
That's right.
And
yeah, absolutely. And so you'll see in labs and across industry more and more mentoring roles coming up, where and also, look, my view is that this is the great part of being a part of a team is knowledge transfer, and when your teammate is successful, that also makes you successful. And so it's really changing the psychology that it's not just one salesperson going in and being an individual contributor, and it's not just one lab technician with all the know-how. The greatest amplification of the lab and of a sales, marketing, service team is when you can transfer knowledge across. And so at Healthineers, and I know others in the industry, and also I see it every day in the labs, is that knowledge transfer is ongoing through mentoring. And what I find is a lot of people like to teach. A lot of people want to play that role. And what's going to be important is that the view of this industry continues to be a really exciting place for medical technologists to step into, for great sales and marketers to step into. And I think part of that great DNA is a knowledge transfer. And so far it's working well, and it's something that we just address on a regular basis.
Tell me about how you mentor and train and educate emerging leaders. What's the approach in your organization to detect and help develop those emerging leaders?
Yeah, so my general philosophy, and a great leader I worked for very early in my med tech career said, Andy, you're the CEO of your business. I had the great responsibility of being a marketing manager for a big stent launch that we did many years ago. And I just found that to be the most empowering statement that I've ever received from a mentor. And he trusted a 28-year-old or 27-year-old to do something extraordinary. And it was that confidence and belief. It didn't mean he wasn't involved. I think he followed that up by saying, I'm on the board of directors. And so he was there. And I still say that line to anyone and almost everyone I work with, because it's that empowerment. And I think talented people, one, they want to be empowered. If you hire well and you're really looking for, and I look for team players, collaborators, great communicators, connectors, if I find that mix, then I know that they have the raw material to be great in a healthcare sales, marketing, service role. The people that want to be the lone wolf, it's not very compelling to me. We are not in lone wolf in a lone wolf problem-solving healthcare paradigm. These are complex questions that our customers are asking, that healthcare providers are needing solutions for. There are multi-stakeholders that are making decisions within hospitals and large laboratories. We need to have a team approach. And so I look for people that are wired to be teammates. I look for people then that want the empowerment, and then they also are vulnerable enough to ask for help when they need it too, because that's really where it's in those tough moments where you can add new muscle, and that's where I try to be there as a senior leader for them to clear barriers or to give them that little helpful pivot or perspective, because so many people have done that for me.
Andy, as you in your role, you have an enormous team.
Right.
As you spot emerging leaders in that team, as much as your overall organization has a sophisticated leadership development structure,
right,
what is it that you like to do to engage and develop those emerging leaders?
Yeah, Matt, it's funny you ask, because 15 years ago I was on that other side, I'd like to think. And sort of what I notice now is I'll spot someone and sort of my antenna goes up really quickly, and my talent radar is when someone new to the organization or an up and coming talent, or quite frankly really anyone, can do something really unique that I haven't had the ability to do or the perspective to do. And I sort of laugh when I joined into healthcare 15 years ago. I guess I had some good PowerPoint skills, and a lot of the senior people said, give that to Andy because he can make that look really good. How does he do it so fast? And now I'm looking at folks coming up with how they use technology and how they approach problem solving and how they can mobilize teams. And I say, wow, they're really good at that, and they're teaching me something. And so in that moment when I'm inspired by someone in the organization, then and they are consistently delivering at high value, again with some of the great teamwork, communication, connecting skills that I really look for, then they just go on the radar. And that is, for me, it's a call to them. How you doing? How's everything going? You doing okay? And just that little touch point has always been so powerful for me when someone senior to me or someone I looked up to would just take a moment for me. And so just like the golden rule, I want to pass that forward. So that's outside of the formal structures. Informally, I think great leaders really have an eye for talent. They may have a little bit of a bias to spend more time with talent, but they also know that their talent, the top talent in the organization, can take them to new heights.
Now, amongst all the interesting things that you've done and
Right.
you are doing, you've just recently published a book.
That's
The
right.
Trilogy of Yes.
Yes.
Tell me about that, and tell me about the idea that you're expressing.
Sure.
in it.
So the Trilogy of Yes is about how 3 skills salespeople can use: connection, communication, and cooperation to inspire customers to say yes. And I joke about it, but as I step back, this is really true. Healthcare sales folks and marketers as well, I can't deliver lab results to a healthcare provider. I am not trained, and quite frankly, it may not be legal for me to do that. I could not deploy a stent to a patient. So I wasn't able to be a user of my own product. And 2, I don't want a stent. I don't want a professional healthcare provider to say, Andy, we need to do an infectious disease panel on you. Now, if they're going to do one of those, I want it to be Siemens Healthineers, no doubt about it. So I'm not a user, and I don't want to be a consumer of my technology. So what in the world am I going to do to express to someone highly trained and who will be trusting me and the products to be able to use those on patients? I got to be really good at something else. And what I've seen time and time again, Matt, is that connection, the ability for the salesperson to connect with a healthcare provider or customer, to communicate effectively, and then to build a cooperative win-win team with that customer is exactly how you build that bridge. And the folks that have done this so well are purposeful in their planning. They run a specific sales approach that mirrors real-life relationship building. And even in this era of high complexity healthcare change, and I would extend the Trilogy of Yes to all salespeople, these are the foundational skills that all salespeople have to really inspire customers to move with you.
So there was a moment where you had all these ideas, which
Right.
you've been applying already as they
Yes.
developed. You wrote a book. So in your spare time, from 3 to 5 a.m., what was the moment that you said, you know what, I want to write a book about this?
Yeah, it was when you're in business and in complex situations, and I like to think of the laboratory business as it's the great drumbeat of healthcare because of its impact, and it's you got to keep time, right? A great band can only be good if it stays in time, and I think the lab is the drumbeat of healthcare in so many ways. I wanted a moment where I could create a new song on my own, and so just me as an individual, I wanted to go and express my creativity and express and share as a teacher my experiences with people on what I've seen great salespeople, great sales teams, great marketing organizations do, not just in North America. I've seen this across 5 continents, across many cultures, that no matter the situation you're in, if you can extend yourself and create a valuable connection with your customer, start to establish trust, you're effective in communication. Remember, you're this bridge communicating value. You don't have the experience, so you have to use your words and you have to use your body language, and folks that know how to do that can really inspire then through a cooperative win-win team with their customer really great results. And so it was just really important for me to do, and then it was just a labor of love to put it all together. And it took about 6 months from start to finish.
Wow.
I've probably read the book 75 times in my edits and said, here it is, and now ready for folks to consume. And so far, a lot of people are getting value out of it, which is fun.
As I was learning about the book and actually had a chance to read a little of the excerpt that you shared, you had a really there's 2 ideas in there that I really was intrigued by.
Yeah.
One was this idea of the discontent in our society.
Yeah.
To tie that to your sales philosophy, I found this very interesting.
Yeah, good point. So I think we are in an era right now, this is my personal opinion, and I think there are many examples to draw from, and it's certainly an approach you can take in a negotiation or with customers where you anchor in on conflict, chaos, and discontent. And certainly you could have a combative negotiation at any time where it's about winning and losing and who's up and who's down, and ultimately it's not about the deal that you bring together that's a win-win. It's about one side winning versus the other, and that is a philosophy. That's an approach. I think you see that a lot right now. My experience, and especially in healthcare, and my personality as well, my management style, all anchor on connection, communication, and cooperation, the antithesis of chaos, conflict, and discontent. It's the other side, because in that what I've seen is the durability of what you create, the longevity, the profitability, the satisfaction that's created actually is so much greater in value than trying to get that short-term win through using some of those other measures. So it was important for me to maybe in an era where the pendulum is over on one side a little bit, say, think about this, and because this one works too, and oh, by the way, it might be the better long-term approach as well.
And you gave an example of not saying, don't say no in a negotiation.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that concept.
Well, no's a conflict word. So, Andy, I'd like a discount on your product. No. Oh, I'd now want to have an engagement with you. Why not? And so I actually joke with some of my regulatory and quality and finance friends in healthcare is that if you want to have a somewhat of a conflict-filled engagement, or you want to start the sales process internally, say no to a salesperson, because then they're going to come back at you. Yeah. So what I use instead of saying no is, in this framework of the Trilogy of Yes, is always say yes when a customer asks for something, as long as you use if. So yes, if. Yes, I will give you a discount on the product if you buy 2. And the key there is that you trade value for value. You always are trading value for value. And actually customers, especially very good procurement leaders, they've been trained on how to drive price down and get maximum value out of you. And if you just keep saying yes, for example, they will drive price down. If you say no, they will engage and be potentially combative. If you say yes, if, you're always getting something in return. And I don't think I've been in a negotiation in the last many years where I've ever said no, and I've done major deals by trading value for value. Yes, if, and I'll tell you what, it's infectious when your teams start to pick it up as well too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is a great salesperson a social engineer?
Ooh, not necessarily.
Okay.
And maybe I'd ask you what, in your definition of social engineer, what you mean by that, and then maybe I can frame that a little bit more too.
Yeah, so good point. So when I'm thinking about social engineering, I'm sort of thinking about the individual that sort of has the ability to adapt their approach based on the characteristics of who they're interacting with. Now, I guess there's a dark side to that. There's the social engineering hack, cyber penetration and getting a password away from somebody. So maybe the word social engineering. Why don't I try an empath? Is a great salesperson likely to be an empath?
I think it helps. I don't think it's required. I saw a study on a LinkedIn post recently that talked about not all salespeople believe that you have to build a really close and endearing relationship with your customer. And those great salespeople have a process on how they do it. So I don't think it's so much about being empathetic. It's about being purposeful and consistent in your approach. So for me, what I do is, it is important for me early on in the relationship building that I form a connection with a customer, something that we have in common, because that starts to put trust into motion. It's a surrogate, or it's a early placeholder that links us on something outside of business discussion that says, oh, we have something in common. We can move from that point forward. And by the way, science also says connections are good for our health, so why wouldn't I do that right away? And so I am empathetic. I am watching for clues and looking at things. However, some great salespeople I've worked with, many are introverts, who maybe it takes a little bit more time, but what they're great listeners, and they're incredibly well prepared. So when they have a comfort level and become a little bit more extroverted in their exchange, they have all the clues and the tips and the tricks, and their preparation has put them in position to be highly empathetic if they are called upon to be that way. So I think the great thing of sales is it's about being really front and center. It's about being authentic. Yeah. When you are who you are with a customer, and they know that that's the real you, that's trust. That's cooperation. That's where real value can start to be shared, or a vulnerability where people can start to open and talk about what the real issues or challenges are that they're facing, and maybe you have a solution for it.
Yeah, some great insights here. So Andy Olen, thank you so much for joining the Business of Healthcare today, and good luck on the sale of the book and the distribution. I hope it knocks the numbers off on Amazon.
Thanks so much, Matt. It's been great being with you today.
Thank you for joining the Business of Healthcare. You can find us at www.bohseries.com or by searching on Business of Healthcare wherever you listen to podcasts. Matthew Hanis is founder and host of Business of Healthcare. TJ Ingracia was our videographer. Thanks SPI Health for underwriting this interview. I'm Sophia Ige. Join us next as we begin our series on the future of healthcare leadership, underwritten by GE Healthcare, St. Louis University, and CAMI, the Commission of the Accreditation of Healthcare Management Education.